Hello, everyone. Welcome to the StreetSmart Wisdom podcast. And our guest today is Michael Gervais. Very excited to have him here. And I might get this wrong, but you feel free to correct me. But he's a sports psychologist for the Seattle Seahawks and does some other incredible work. So this is our wisdom profile section. So we try to get an idea of who we're talking to. So Michael, who are we talking to? You know, how would you describe what you do?
Cool. Okay, well, there's two questions in there, like who am I and what do I do? And so I'll start with I'll start in that order. So by trade and training, I'm a sport and performance psychologist. And so that path, I can get into the mechanics of that path, but let me start with the end in mind, that sport and performance psychology is really the study and application of how the most extraordinary thinkers and doers in the world have been able to artistically express, for the most part, their craft. And sometimes their craft is tangible and observable from a physical standpoint, and sometimes it's not. You know, it can be ranging anywhere from spoken word to entrepreneurship to elite athletics. And so really it's a study and research and application of that research of how the best in the world become. And then the second part of that is working with those said individuals, the modern contemporary ones, to help them pursue their potential. And so that sounds maybe a little esoteric. And so to make it more concrete, I spent my time, I'll work in reverse order, the last, I think it's been 9 years with the Seattle Seahawks, an NFL team, and created a business with Coach Carroll. So working inside that culture, and he is magnificent at switching on a culture and knowing the abilities and capabilities of humans and the ecosystem to help people pursue their very best work. And so that's been a phenomenal experience that I've been enjoyed to be part of, you know, as a professional and then as a business partner with him over the last handful of years. And then prior to that, I spent a bunch of time with Olympians and across 3 Olympics, which has been wonderful and powerful. And I spent time in hostile and consequential environments with projects that Red Bull put on, like the Red Bull Stratos, and, you know, projects that were human potential shifting, where people were doing things that have never been done before. Meaning Red Bull Stratos is a good example, where Felix Baumgartner jumped from just about 130,000 feet from, you know, the stratosphere. And he was the first person to ever do that. The brightest minds in aerospace weren't quite sure the odds of success. And it was a noble cause in the sense that we needed to understand what would happen to the human body at a free fall from that standpoint. Like, if we are really going to Mars, can the human, you know, can the human embrace that type of pressure, you know, on free fall? And he was successful, which was obviously good for a lot of reasons. And then prior to that, spent time with special operators and in the UFC, being able to corner fights, which has been a tremendous experience for me. And then
corner fights, like be in their corner, cheering them on?
Yeah, I wouldn't say cheering them on, but like, yeah, essentially in the UFC, you're able to have 3 people in your corner, a head coach, a second coach, and then a cut person. And so in this case, there was a head coach and then a head coach, me, and then the cut person, the cut man as they're referred to. And so, yeah, that's been awesome as an experience, you know, working with those men and women who, in the most ancient ways, test I would say the ultimate test of physical prowess, you know, which is nearly no rules in a cage, which sounds so barbaric, you know, across from another highly skilled human. And when all you're left with is your hands, your feet, and your head, and, you know, your mind, if you will, it's incredibly hostile, rugged, and stressful environment. So preparing them to be able to thrive in that environment is part of that work. And then traditional stick and sports, you know, early days was hockey and basketball and doing some work there. And so that's the kind of the concreteness of what sport and performance psychology works with. And I've been fortunate enough to work with a bunch of artists, musicians and artists as well. And without giving names, like when they announce that they are going on tour, that it sells out in 10 minutes, those types of folks. And so that's kind of the concrete nature. And then who I am as a man, I just consider myself a spiritual man first, above all else, and an adventurer that is, relentlessly trying to understand how it is that we can express high performance and reveal wisdom. And so those are the missions and the characteristics of who I am.
Wow, fascinating. So
you say that to all your guests.
No, not
so
really.
Thank you for being kind.
No, so the whole stratosphere thing is kind of mind bending, and and then I'm probably going to make enemies on this one, but is UFC, is it a sport?
Oh yeah, it's a good question. I'm glad you asked that. So I'm a psychologist, trained psychologist, right? And my undergrad is in psychology, master's in sports science. It was called kinesiology at the time, and then a PhD in psychology, and then licensed. And I share that with you just to give some context of the blending of training between mind and body. And I was at a conference and I was presenting some of my findings and a project I was working on with the UFC with a fighter. And this is in front of a room of other psychologists. And you've been to too many conferences, I'm sure, where, I don't know, it's a group of scientists. There's probably about 65 people in the room. It's one of the breakout rooms. It's a very niche conversation we're having about hostile environments and psychology. And so I'm sharing the findings, and I could feel there was some tension in the environment. And at the end of my presentation, a person in the back of the room raises her hand and stands up and says, "I'm appalled. I am appalled that you have helped people become more violent." And I thought, oh boy, here we go. Okay. And so my response, as a contemplative person, I think deeply about, I'd like to think I think deeply, but I think a lot about how I move forward in life. And so I paused, I took a moment to honor the gravity of that thought. And I said, my commitment is to help people in whatever facet they want to live life, to help them. And as long as it's not to help a predator, I'm not in that spirit of there's some limitations here, but these are two grown adults that are working to express their talent in an agreed environment, an agreed time, and they have time to prepare for it, and it's dangerous. And this is the life and the path that they're choosing. And so you can kind of feel the room settle just a little bit, but still it's so violent. And in your question was about sport. The nature of combat sport, as it's known, started back pre-Olympian. And the Olympics, for example, were a way to keep warriors sharp and to keep them physically fit and mentally sharp. And that's kind of what was one of the impetuses for the modern day Olympics. And so is it a sport? Yes. Is it one of the most intense sports? It is. And there are physical consequences that are on the line, unlike, let's say, golf. There's not a real intense physical consequence other than maybe a chronic physical thing that could take place. So in some ways, it is maybe considered the ultimate sport. And other people would say it's the worst sport you can imagine. They're using elbows to break each other's faces. And I say, yeah, that is pretty.
It ain't curling.
It's incredible. It's an incredible environment for the human experience. And I just want to put a note on there is that there's two types of people in MMA, at least two. I'm oversimplifying. And the same holds true, come to find out, in American football, is that there are people that are deeply committed to the spiritual path. And this is the kind of ultimate expression of, do they have command of their themselves? And they do it literally on a spiritual journey. And then there's the other faction And they would say that they are not violent. They're artists, and in a very consequential environment. And then there's another faction which says, yeah, no, I like to be hit and I like to hit. And this serves me well. It serves, like, this is the group I belong to. And, you know, I don't know, who are we to say, or who am I to say, I'll be, keep it to myself here. Like, who am I to say, like, what's right and wrong for a way a person wants to live when they're adults making adult decisions together, you know? And so I know there's a whole moral, ethical thing that we could explore together, which is fun. But and the same holds true. So let me just pin that for a minute. The same holds true for in American football. I did a recent research where I asked members of the Seattle Seahawks, coaches and athletes, this is a handful of years ago, is football violent? And I defined violence as the intent to harm. And the numbers were about 70-30. 70% of people, coaches and athletes, saying no, and the 30% saying it can be. There was a small sliver, it was about a 2% sliver, that said absolutely. And so majority of people inside of American football don't think that it is violent because the intent to harm is not pervasive. They are tacticians, they are amazing athletes that are well-conditioned, well-trained to execute in a potentially dangerous environment. And, but they would say that for the most part, the intent to harm, meaning violence, is not part of the mindset. It can be though, which is the scary part for many of them.
Wow. So
I didn't think we're going to talk about this.
No, so
here we go.
No, you know, I guess the kind of questions that naturally bubbled up that I think comprise, you know, this whole profile of not only who you are, but what you do. And I have one more question on this because I think it's just pretty interesting. So it's, okay, two questions. So one is MMA like wrestling where it's a show and like it's preconceived who's going to be the winner sometimes, or nothing like that, right?
No, as far as I know, like, then there's two types of wrestling, right? There's wrestling that is a sport, and then there's wrestling with athletes, and you're talking about WWE, right? Like, they are athletic, highly athletic, and it is an entertainment, scripted entertainment, but they are highly athletic. In MMA, mixed martial arts, it is exactly what it sounds like. It's not one discipline of a martial art, but it's a mix of martial arts. And when the sport first emerged in a public-facing way, like one art, a black belt in one art with a little bit of sophistication in a second art, was expected to be able to do well in a closed cage with another skilled human. And now it's like they are black belts across, brown black belts across 3 disciplines.
Wow.
You know, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, Muay Thai, stand-up striking. It's amazing. And so it's not scripted, it's real, it's dangerous, it's real blood. And real consequences take place when people make mistakes.
Wow, fascinating. So then I guess the next natural question I have, so isn't it a dichotomy that, you know, I know you from the Wisdom 2.0 conferences and mindfulness. Yeah. So you have football players and MMA fighters. A lot of that, even in those disciplines, mindfulness or presence of mind is part of peak performance, yes or no? Or
oh yeah, this is the dichotomy here is interesting. If you think about, you and I have been practicing mindfulness for decades. Okay. And so obviously the attention of mindfulness has been wonderful. And there's also and I know that this is not you and likely not your audience, but there's a short stop that is happening, I think, in this performance world. And this short stop of mindfulness is that the way that I embrace mindfulness is there's at least 2 pillars. There's awareness and wisdom. Insight is like the linking between the two for me. And if you stop if the training was just about awareness, it's not doing the tradition justice. And there are plenty of people in the psychology field and the athletic field that are using mindfulness for an increased awareness. And if you stop there, the athlete or performer or human would be a better, more skilled in their craft. Because with increased awareness of our thoughts and our emotions and our body sensations in the environment, we will perform better. But it's so far short of insight and wisdom. And so the dichotomy is, if you're committed to the full experience and the opportunity of mindfulness, then insight and wisdom is the real change-making, embracing of and acceptance of. That's the mechanism. And awareness is required, and deep focus is required, and deep concentration is required to get to the insights. And with a bundle of insights, we get to the wisdom. To be able to express the wisdom is another complication. And the dichotomy, sorry, full circle, long way to answer, between a highly aggressive, sometimes violent way of living with mindfulness. And let's remember that the ancient warriors, the samurai warriors, and some of the ancient warriors had a contemplative practice. And
right.
To really embrace how they wanted to die, how they wanted to truly live, and how they wanted to be in the moments of danger, real danger. And so they turn, many of them turn to the tradition. And so the dichotomy is unique, and that's what I love about it. It's what I love about it.
It's fascinating. Not only is it fascinating, it's a little bit mind-bending, in a good way. And it's also somehow comforting because, I have two boys and we're a basketball house family. So, my boys met George Mumford once, and, and he worked with, with all those greats, and, Golden State, and the key pillar is mindfulness, and the Seahawks also. That's part of it. We can get into that maybe in the next section, but I just think it's fascinating. And in this section, why did you go this route? Did you just take a left turn? And
thank you for asking that. I just want to be really clear is that when I was growing up, I didn't know somebody that had a doctoral degree other than the pediatrician that I didn't know. Our family kind of dropped out, if you will. And my parents grew up in the city, New York and Boston. And when they met and got married at a young age, they kind of dropped out, in the late 60s, 70s, and went to a farm and just kind of did not really the hippie life, but just really to get grounded in a unique way at that time. And so I grew up on a farm, very much, and not a farm like a I don't know, manicured farm, like a real rugged type of experience. And we just had land, we just had land, and we didn't have many neighbors. This was in Virginia. And so then we moved to the city. So I got all these really organic kind of granola roots. And then we moved to the city in Los Angeles, into California. And it was this whole kind of thing that took place where there was sport, and there was adult coaches telling kids what to do. And I grew up in the early days on the farm trying to just navigate Mother Nature, and there was no real coaching from adults.
And no team experience, really.
Very little. Yeah, I did play on a soccer team, but it was so kind of just friendly, it was just, and so the city life was very, very different. And then we moved to Southern California. We went to Northern California first, then Southern California. And that's where I fell in love with surfing. And so it's kind of back to the Mother Nature experiences. And what ended up happening I was about age 15, is that there's two types of surfing, Steve. One is called competitive surfing, and the other one's free surfing. And free surfing is very much a hardcore, you know, do it solo, do it heavy, don't talk about it, no bragging. You do it for the purity of the experience. And the deeper you can be in the dark, in the most dangerous experiences, the more pure of an experience you'll have.
Okay.
And the competitive surfing is like flashbang, judge score, you know, leaderboard ranking, sponsorships, you know, the totally two different worlds. And I liked both. And so what ends up happening when I was 15 is that I was in a competitive environment and I was a mess. And I was a good little surfer at that age in Southern California. And I was probably 20% of my potential during this competition. Like I said, I was scared. I was anxious. I didn't know what anxiety was, but I knew that I was far, far below what I was capable of expressing. And what was dangerous in that moment was the people on the beach. And for me, the true danger was what other people were thinking of me. And so it just was this light bulb moment that, my goodness, my mind is the constrictor to how I want to express myself. And my mind was weak, and it was untrained. It was uncultivated. It was unexamined. It was undisciplined. And I didn't know that psychology existed. I just knew that my mind was getting in the way because of anxiety, because of worry of what other people were thinking. And it eventually, looking back now, it eventually set me down this path to want to understand how the mind works. And I barely got out of high school. I was surfing more than I was in school. And I went to a community college, a junior college, had an amazing experience. And what ends up taking place is that three professors, it's going to sound like a bad joke, but it was a theologian, a psychologist, and a philosopher. And they were Dr. Kuzio-Zenka, Dr. Berkins, they were best friends at this junior college. And they saw me coming. I mean, they saw this kid that was full of energy and life and curiosity and adventure and an appreciation for risk and danger with no clue, like no clue. They saw me coming. And I felt, looking back, man, they really wrapped around me and said, hey kid, let us show you some stuff about the invisible world. And it set me down this path where I never needed to be challenged to read another book in psychology, philosophy, or spiritual tomes, that I just couldn't get enough of it. And it set me down a path to get a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and then a PhD. And I'm still trying to figure it out. And, you know, it's just it's a life mission to help understand human potential by helping people train their mind to live in the present moment more often, because the present moment is where high performance is expressed and wisdom revealed. And so that, like, I wake up every morning consumed with, am I able to do my very best work toward that aim?
Phenomenal, phenomenal. So it kind of answers the question I'm about to ask, but I might ask it again anyway. Maybe I'll get a different slant on it. And also, I grew up in Brighton Beach in Coney Island. So we didn't have big waves. There's some waves in Rockaway, but we were in Brighton. So we did a lot of body surfing.
There you go.
You know, and very different experience, but definitely grew up spending lots of time on the beach.
You know, Steve, I just had a thought as you're sharing that, is that I want to make sure that I say out loud that I am not this boldly courageous alpha, you know, best surfer, most whatever. Like, that's not me. So I want to make sure I say that out loud, because I can hear some of my friends going, you know, like, okay, Mike, you know, like you're kind of bragging right now. So, and I want to make sure that that I'm editing that properly with you, because I feel humbled that you say, yeah, I grew up body surfing, and I'm saying, yeah, I'm surfing challenging deep waves. I'm like, wait, the love of the ocean's the love of the ocean. So
true. East Coast or West Coast.
Yeah.
It's not the same ocean, but it's an ocean.
Yeah, that's right.
Got it. So we're kind of there, but I'm gonna ask you this question anyway. I think I know the answer, but if you were a superhero, what would your origin story be? You know, what was the thing that set you on this path to be who you are?
Okay, I'm glad you know the answer because this is the first time I've entertained this. So I don't know the frameworks that you know. And now I'm thinking like, what are all the superheroes? I'm not very good
Well,
there.
the one thing,
The origin story is cool.
right? So it sounds like those three teachers, like, were a catalyst that sent you like in a different direction. I don't know, but what,
Yeah.
like, or the light bulb went off while you were surfing and you realized that you were not aware of whatever.
Well, I think the origin story was built around pain. You know, the suffering that I had something inside of me that I was not able to express because of the conditions, the environmental conditions. So it was that suffering that I feel that um, I've come to learn it wasn't just me. You know, as a 15-year-old, small-minded approach to life, I thought I was the only one that suffered from anxiety. And so it was really that suffering that led to an approach like, man, I need to figure this thing out because this is bad. And so that's the origin story.
Got
And
it,
then the
got it.
community was really those three men, the beginnings of the community. And then, you know, I'm thinking about, there's a challenge that one of them set up to me. He set up a small little group of about, I think it was probably 10 or 11 of us. And he took us to the bottom of the Grand Canyon with just the Tao Te Ching and a journal, a pencil, and food, and self-sustaining food. And the challenge was to be by ourselves for 7 days without seeing another human. Meaning,
7 days?
yeah, it was
Wow.
it was a spiritual challenge. Like, can you go get to know yourself through the Tao Te Ching? And I couldn't see another one of my people that we went with, the
Your
professor.
parents let them do that?
Can you imagine? I mean, I told you, like hippies, right? Like, you know, like, yeah. I mean, technically I was an adult. I was 18 and a half, you know,
Got it, right.
But all that being said, is like, I'll tell you what, whew, like
Wow,
I didn't,
incredible.
yeah, I didn't realize what I didn't know about myself and coming down there. Like, it was awful and wonderful all in the same type of experience as a 18 and a half year old kind of rug rat trying to chase, you know, waves, you know, like, so yeah, that was one of the early challenges in my life that shaped me.
Wow, wow. Cool. So, okay, so that now I think that kind of rounds out our Wisdom Feed profile with Michael Gervais. And any last words for this section before we sign off?
No, thank you for asking. I don't get to talk about kind of some of the early narrative very often, so thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, thanks for being a guest on our Street Smart Wisdom podcast, and we'll see you next time.